Attention Southern Nevadans. Turn up that dial for some real talk about the issues that matter to us. From some of our Valley's local leaders, business owners, and even the occasional elected official. Airing now on incredibly intelligent local radio stations and streaming worldwide at thenevadapatriot.com. Welcome to the Nevada Patriot Podcast with Matt Sadler.
Welcome to the Nevada Patriot Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Sadler. Thank you for joining us online and at KPFF 97.7 FM here in Pahrump. This episode and all others can be streamed on demand at thenevadapatriot.com. Today's podcast will have very limited commercial interruption, and this is a special episode. I've been excited about doing this interview for a long time. This guest is a man I have immense respect for. Since first meeting him not quite a year ago, maybe, I knew we shared a lot of core convictions. He's a man who has his priorities in order. He is the pastor of Calvary Red Rock, a church in the Summerlin area of Las Vegas, and went about a mile or two away from my old stomping grounds where I grew up, which is kind of neat how life has a way of kind of weaving us together and circling around. He's active politically in a time when there aren't very many church leaders speaking into the political realm. It takes a lot of courage and a lot of balance. Pastor Gregg Seymour, welcome to the show.
Wow, Matt, thank you so much. And it's a huge blessing to be here with you. Likewise, a man that I have much respect for, Mr. Matt Sadler, who, and you're right, my brother. It was pretty much right out of the gate that I felt a kindred spirit with you. And we definitely know how the battle rolls, and the priorities are definitely a necessity.
Yes. Okay, so please tell our listeners a little bit about your background and journey. Kind of the floor is yours, just to kind of let everybody know out here in Pahrump who you are.
Well, I have been in full-time ministry since 2004. All of it here in Las Vegas. I moved to Las Vegas in 1996, fresh out of drug and alcohol rehabilitation center in LA County. Pretty much had lost everything. Best thing that ever happened to me. I can say that now. Back then it was rough. Came out here to Las Vegas to get my feet under me. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. I met Jesus at that rehab.
Amen.
So I was a new Christian at 35 years old, and needed to get back up on my feet and try to put my life back together. My girlfriend at the time, who's been my wife for many, many years, moved out here with we had a son together, and I had two children from a previous. She had two children from a previous. So we're the Brady Bunch. And so she was moving out here to get back up on her feet, and here, brand new in the Lord, went to work in corporate restaurant management, went to work for Applebee's, opened up 5 of the Applebee's here in town back in the late 90s, really.
Wow.
Then was offered a job at La Salsa, which is a Mexican restaurant chain on the Strip. We had restaurants at Caesar's Palace, at the Forum Shops, and it was the Desert Passage Mall at the Aladdin back in those days. It's Planet Hollywood now, but back in those days.
I remember.
And you remember and so I went into management there, worked my way up the ladder very, very well. Had a promising career, but the Lord had other plans. And so I ended up getting married, and, we really were getting our life on track. Just growing in my relationship with the Lord, learning more and more. And in 2004, there's 1,000 details in the testimony, but I ended up getting called into full-time ministry at Calvary Chapel, Green Valley. And I was at that church for a total of 18 years. I was on staff for 15 years as assistant pastor. under John Knapp there. And, I was very happy. I had no intentions of going anywhere. I took my position as second very, very well. I knew that was my calling. I understood my calling, and it was till death do us part, until the Lord started to stir my heart back in probably 2014. And I didn't understand it at first, but it ended up being revealed that he was calling me and my wife to plant a church. Nice. So then I didn't know if it was time to leave Las Vegas or, so we prayed, we fasted. The Lord said, no, you're staying in Las Vegas. And well, we have a big Vegas. And so we prayed and fasted some more, and we heard the instruction from our Lord saying the west side. Well, that helped, but we have a pretty big west side.
Yeah, we do.
We really didn't know where. So we, the whole night, we're talking a couple of years here of just praying, fasting, seeking the Lord on really where he wanted us. And we eventually had it confirmed to us that it was in the Summerlin area. And so we were ready, all set, ready to come on over and launch. And lo and behold, an opportunity arose to go out on the mission field and take a team of young adults for a year, of which we thought was a distraction from what we were called to do, which was plant Calvary Red Rock in the Summerlin area. And, again, we took it to prayer and fasting. And sure enough, the Lord said, no, you're going to go out on the mission field for a year. And so kicking and screaming, we didn't really understand, what was happening at the time, but our God, we had to go out there for that year because he really wanted to show us specifically how he wanted Calvary Red Rock to operate. And it was a very missional church. We were to, be outside of our walls in a way that I really didn't understand. And I had to go out on the mission field to be taught that. And so by the time we got back, my pastor had asked me to pray and fast about it. When I told him I will, but I already know the answer. And I told him, I'm not going to say the word, but I'll give you a hint. It's 2 letters and it starts with an N, but we'll go pray and fast, and I laugh about that to this day because the Lord smashed us during that year out there. We started in Mexico. We went to Cambodia. We went to the Philippines. We went all over the world, and the Lord just really showed us what a Great Commission church was, what, he expected from his ecclesia, his church. And when we came back, we were totally different. The trajectory of the ministry was totally different. And that's what factored into the launch of our church in 2017. And, we opened it up, teaching the word verse by verse, like most Calvaries do. That's one of the Calvary Chapel distinctives. And so, things were moving along until 2020. We started getting into the election cycle and started really seeing just the platform of evil in a different way, coming through the portals of politics in a way that I really had never noticed before. The dynamic was different in 2020. And then, of course, we went right into the pandemic and everything that happened there. And so that really has been what's factored into my driving force of being a church of action, being involved. I liken politics to the mission field. We unfortunately, God created government, but man created politics, and man has messed it up quite well, like we do everything. Politics is a dirty word, and it is a swamp. And, I'm learning a lot as I'm navigating through the water. But listen, I view it as a mission field. It is, God knows nothing, no difference between the sacred and the secular. Everything is sacred. And everywhere we step our foot, it is sacred, and we are to be the salt and light, hands and feet of our Lord everywhere. And the political arena is the major portal of evil coming into our country and our lives right now. And so that's where we're stepping up to take the battle where it needs to be.
Yeah. So, and going off that, when I read scripture, I see that we're exposed to the full counsel of God. We're commanded to, and especially as leaders, to expose the congregation to the full counsel of God. The Bible is supposed to be, it's useful for everything, right? That's very clear. And I see clearly that politics is part of that counsel, but many church leaders, it seems, for some reason or another, they don't view it that same way. They want to do the separation. They say, well, we're going to focus on, God's will, God's sovereign. Let's leave politics out of it. But basically, if you can't compartmentalize things like that, because God is in control. We know that. We serve a big God, but we have these responsibilities, whether it's in our own household, in our communities, and with our neighborhood, in our cities, our towns, our counties, and ultimately in the world. So we can't, I guess, for lack of a better term, we can't shirk those responsibilities. That's not to say we have to only focus on the political realm, but it's something that we can't afford to neglect. And I think you probably see it the same way.
No, I see it the exact same way. Let me tell you, my belief is that the reason we are where we are here as a nation, specifically, now I talk, the reason we are where we are is because of the silent church. And this is nothing new. This has been going on for a long time.
Right.
I love the book, a book put out recently by Eric Metaxas called Letter to the American Church, where he takes very, very well the comparison between our current day church and what happened back in Nazi Germany, where the church was basically told to stay in their lane. They had been taught, from the pulpit that, they were that we're not to get involved in political efforts. We are just to simply spread the gospel, which is true. We are to spread the gospel, but
sure.
The definition of that has been very, very watered down. And we know that, this went all the way to the, as the train cars were driving, we're going past the churches with, those with the Jews being led to the slaughter because of the regime and what had taken place there. Their response was, let's just sing the hymns louder so we don't have to listen to the cries that they couldn't take. And, that's really been, nothing is new. This hasn't just happened. The church has been asleep for a long time. We've been given the power and authority of Jesus Christ. And if we just stood up and stepped into that, evil would be thwarted and absolutely crushed in a moment's time. But the church is not doing that. Let me just quickly, tell you what I believe a huge miss from biblical interpretation is. Jesus, when he was with his disciples there at Caesarea Philippi, found in Matthew chapter 16 is Matthew's account of this. That's when they were sitting around up there and, they were asking Jesus, Jesus was asking them, who do men say that I am? And they responded and said, well, some say you're, John the Baptist or, Elijah. But Jesus looked over at Peter and he asked Peter a very interesting question. He said, but who do you say that I am? And Peter said, well, no doubt you're the Christ. You are the Son of God. And Jesus answered Peter and said, you're absolutely correct. The flesh and blood has not revealed that to you, but my Father in heaven. Jesus went on to say, and I tell you guys that upon this rock, okay, the rock meaning his testimony, the testimony of who he is the Christ, he is the Son of God. Upon this rock, I will build the translation that is in most Bibles is church. I will build my church, but that is not the original language. The original language is ecclesia. Jesus said, upon this rock, I will build my ecclesia. Now, why would Jesus use that word? Well, first off, the word church wasn't coined for another 400 years. William Tyndale lost his life because of his proper translation of this into ecclesia, not church. Why is that important? Ecclesia is a Greek term that basically means a called out group. It is a group that is established to gather in the public square. And in the early days, that's what the ecclesia was. It was the public square. It's where the debates took place. It's where the church met. The church was always involved there because we wanted God to be an influence in all of the political decisions and governmental rulings that would be done. We always wanted, God in the middle of that. And so the ecclesia would meet, and, there was always a sign above the entrance of every gathering of the ecclesia. And there were 2 words on that sign. Those 2 words were isonomia and eleutheria, which meant liberty and equality. Liberty and equality. That's why Jesus died. Freedom began at the cross. And freedom that this country has been established under is a gift to us from God. And we've been given stewardship over this gift. We've been given stewardship responsibility over everything that God has given us. And we've been blessed to be born in the greatest nation in the world. This nation is set apart from any other nation, being established under the lordship of Jesus Christ.
I agree.
And of course, we've come a long way. But anyways, the church has stepped back. The pulpits are silent. We don't get involved in politics because politics is dirty. I love what Rob McCoy says. Whenever people tell him, you can't get involved in politics. Politics is dirty. He's like, "What's your point? The church is dirty. World is dirty, right?
Especially when we're being honest, right?"
That's not an excuse to step back and do nothing. The scriptures that I've studied for over 25 years tell me that we are to engage evil. We are to engage in battle from front to back, from cover to cover. The scriptures declare that. And so the pious pulpit, that tells everyone. I mean, there was a very high profile pastor just a week ago declared how frustrated he gets with pastors that just seem to keep everybody upset and anxious all the time with all the current events that are going on, that the church needs to be a place of safety and peace and refuge. And you have to really read between the lines on that, because what he's basically saying is, come to church, be in your bubble, stick your head in the sand, and let evil have its way, because the Lord's coming back soon anyways. And that is not the scriptures that I've studied for 25 years.
I agree. And, a specific point I wanted to touch on for the listeners who may not already know. I mean, a lot of my listeners here locally know that I ran for political office. And when I ran for political office last year, I was fired up that you extended me and other candidates an opportunity and an invite to speak to the congregation. And as a bonus, it was great to see that you actually had lived in our assembly district, the one that I was running in, which was a bonus for me. But truth be told, that was probably the highlight of the campaign trail for me. I'm not just here buttering you up. I'm speaking from the heart. That was, and whether any constituents were there possible to vote, but the chance to go out there on a platform like that to speak the truth, to speak on behalf of the unborn, it was such a privilege. I and the other candidates obviously appreciate the platform, and I really wanted to just take this time to publicly thank you for that opportunity. And I pray and I wish that more pastors would have that same kind of gusto as you. It's a breath of fresh air.
Listen, we the people are those that have been established in charge of our great republic that has been established, called the United States of America. And we, the people, should be led by we, the church. And, during election season, I felt an obligation to the congregation to allow all candidates to come in. And not all of them knew the Lord. But, our congregation, we're in the Word constantly. I believe they're strong enough to be able to handle the candidates themselves. They'll take care of the candidates out in the lobby with that Q&A time at the end or whatever we got. But I wanted the candidates to come in and just get exposed and let the congregation, because I pushed to be the hands and feet in the polling booth. This is get involved 101, vote, register to vote. That only half in the state of Nevada, only half of professing evangelical Christians are even registered to vote. Wow. Of those 50%, only 38% of the 50% showed up to vote in our last election, in the 2022 election. That shows you how dismal the Christian voice is. And I mean, and we're surprised that evil is running us over like a tsunami.
Yeah.
We're not doing anything. We're not standing up. And it doesn't take a lot of numbers to make that difference. And so, right now we've turned our sights to the legislative session. There's close to 1,000 bills being, they're in committees, they're going to the floor. There's so many things going on right now. And so, one thing I've been on a kick for the last month now is trying to get my entire congregation connected with the Nellis website, the Nellis web program, which is, the Nevada Legislative Interactive, where from the comfort of your own home, you can go in and voice opinions and submit opinions and voice either support or opposition to bills. A lot of people won't show up at the committee meetings. A lot of people won't phone in and telephonically connect, but everybody can sit at their computer and type out a 2,000 character reason for opposing or supporting a bill. And so, I've been trying to get them involved in that way, just trying to get the congregation involved. And I will tell you, Matt, it was a blessing to have you there, and Calvary Red Rock loves you, and you always have an open invitation, my brother.
Oh, awesome. I look forward to that again at some point. That would be great. And I think, kind of piggybacking on some of the stuff that you said on why maybe we're not as active as we should be as Christians. I think the culture, our society and academia has done, to them, for their goals, it's a good job. For us as humanity and as a republic, it's a horrible job, because I think they get it really twisted on what our founders intended our republic to be like. They push this narrative of the separation of church and state. They focus on 3 or 4 or 5 of the founding fathers that maybe weren't quite evangelical Christians. When you look at our actual real founders, our real framers of the Constitution, all the people that signed those documents, whether it's a Declaration of Independence or the Constitution, you look at their backgrounds, they were Bible believing. You could oftentimes call them Protestant or evangelical Christians. Some are ordained ministers, and they conveniently get left off in academia when they're teaching our kids history. When they taught me history, when I was I'm a product of the public school system in Nevada, and I couldn't. They highlight maybe 3 or 4 founders back then, so they kind of get us primed in a way to make this for the separation between, like you said, from that sphere of the secular and the sacred. When in reality, our founders' intention was for it to be mingled together. You can't separate one from the other, and it was never their intention to.
Listen, even our agnostic founding fathers knew more about the Word of God than probably many, if not most, pastors that are in pulpits today. Why? Because that book was the foundational educator and primer, and of all of the education system and all of life. Sermons that were given back then were event relevant to what was going on during the week or during the month or during the current times. Biblical relevancy is something that was preached from the pulpits every single week. If something happened, if a tornado hit somewhere that week, the sermon on Sunday would be, everything on tornadoes that is mentioned in the scriptures. Right. I got to tell you, I've been studying this book now for a good 25 years, cover to cover. I've studied under the most amazing teachers, and I've, heard so many different aspects and angles of the scriptures. I've heard every argument from every angle. And I got to tell you, the last probably 2 years, this book has come alive, and I'm reading it differently than I ever have. I don't have to go looking for prophecy updates. I would never do a prophecy update because they're a lot of work, right? And usually you do your prophecy updates at the end of the year, and it's like, oh my gosh, you got to put, tons and tons of hours, especially if you're doing it once a year. But let me tell you, right now, there's a prophecy update every single service, Many times I'm checking my phone before I go up to teach, I do 3 services on Sunday. And if I'm mentioning something, I'm checking my phone to make sure that nothing has changed since the last service, because things are changing here on an hourly basis. And and the scriptures are just jumping off the page. Everything is making sense in such a different way right now. So there's many, either the pulpits won't go there. They're treating church and their sermons, pre-2020, just like business as usual. Listen, we're in wartime Christianity, and it's never going to change. Peacetime Christianity is over. It's going to be this way. This is going to get worse. We're, and that's one thing that I probably should add. We're not going to actually, I don't believe, turn this thing around, because the scriptures declare this is what the end times look like. Jen Martell always says, what'd you expect the end times to look like? For those of us that have studied eschatology and prophecies, I mean, everything is perfectly falling into place. Nothing is falling apart. It's falling into place. And so, no, I don't believe that it's going to completely turn around, but either the pulpits are just being, they're going back to peacetime Christianity messages. A lot of them are teaching the scriptures, verse by verse, expositional teaching, and they're covering the observation, the interpretation of the scriptures, doing some application, but they're not current relevant applications the way that they should be. All you got to do is look at 5 minutes of headlines, and you've got your sermon. No matter what area of the scripture you're in, it's just jumping off of the page, and the tie-in is a no-brainer. I've got a couple of brain cells left. I don't have much creativity here. You don't need much creativity. It's a pretty simple connection. And that's why Calvary Red Rock is growing, and churches that are speaking this way are growing. I mean, we are filled up in our building. We're in a building hunt right now. It's time to expand, because Christians know what to do. What can we do? We're Christians. We know what we want to do, and a lot of those things we can't because we are Christians. But they want to know, how can we get involved? What can we do? We want to make a difference. We want our children and our grandchildren to have a country that they could grow up into with the same freedoms and privileges that we had as Americans growing up. And what can we do? And they're just looking for leadership. And so the woke churches are dwindling, and churches that are standing up and taking the fight where the fight needs to go are growing. That's just a fact. And and so, I'm committed to leading the fight and doing the best I can, in getting everyone involved. And we always have things to do to be involved. What's our action items for this next week? Try to send everybody out every single week with an action item of something to do to make a difference for righteousness' sake.
Yeah. And even like you were saying there, that you open up a newspaper or you go online, you can find out what your sermon can be based on. The bad bills, I mean, because I follow them and I speak about them on my show here on this podcast. The bad bills that are being proposed, not only antithetical to the Christian person, but antithetical to really any voter, any constituent that values freedom, that values anything remotely resembling the country that I grew up in as a child, because that's one of my biggest things I feel guilty of on a day-to-day basis, is that my kids, other kids, especially the kids coming up behind them, will they ever even have an opportunity or a chance to enjoy some of the basic things that I so took for granted as a child? Because a lot of these bills just proposed this session already can almost put us on a course that we're not going to be able to recover from. Like you said, there's hundreds and hundreds, or maybe now, like you said, over 1,000. How can our legislators possibly be able to digest that properly to make informed decisions for the constituents? It's a daunting task. And it's also why it's so important that we put, in my opinion, God-fearing, freedom-loving people in those positions of representation, because the minute self-interest gets in the way, which it happens on both sides of the aisle, bad bills with bad consequences, we're going to be, reaping it for, sowing it years down the line. So what are your thoughts on some of that? Actually, some specific bills, anything pop out recently that you kind of brought forward to the congregation that are particularly poignant to this?
Yeah. I mean, let's start with maybe SB 131, which is a bill designed to legalize, make official Nevada as a abortion destination.
Right.
So abortion tourism and everything that it opens up there. It also even removes even more of the criteria of inspections and, health standards, for abortion doctors and abortion clinics. Right. There's just so much, rank negative that's in that bill. That's an interesting one because it's being presented before the Labor and Commerce Committee, which is interesting. Not healthcare, not it's the Labor and Commerce Committee, because of again, it's commerce. It's going to mean a lot of money for our state, and so they had a hearing about 3 weeks ago. I mentioned it to our church on a Sunday. And the committee meeting was Monday morning, and we had 35 people show up from our congregation, along with all of the others that were there, which, the room's not that big. It pretty much packed it out, and we really had our voices heard. And that bill has slowed down right now. I know that they're reassessing. It's amazing to me, and I just wish I could get this to everybody, how few people standing up for the right thing would make the most unbelievable difference. It doesn't take a massive army.
Right.
The other side, Satan, they're driven by evil. They're charged, demonically, honestly. And Satan is a big mouth. He's got a lot of hot air. Is he that roaring lion seeking whom he may devour? Yes, he is. But is he the toothless lion that holds nothing up against the power and authority of Jesus Christ? Yes, he is. He's both. And it all depends on what we do with Christ and how we walk in the authority of what we've been given. So, that's a bill that, and again, if you go onto the Nellis website and go to the public opinion stats, there's always a graph there. And those graphs, like the graph on that now, is probably 70% opposed and 30% in favor of. But listen, the amount of people that have participated in that are I think 180. If we could have 200 people, we could crush that thing. It should be 99% opposed. And then we use that against these legislators that should be listening to the people, but we know they're not. And so when it comes time for reelection, or maybe even before reelection, depending on the behaviors, maybe it's recall, but we take those and we show them, you have not ruled, on any of the will of the people. And so we've had it. If we can rally enough, to do that, then that would be that. Another one is, let's see, SB 163. That one that is going to require many insurance providers to handle gender dysphoria and a lot of issues that are going on there. So that's one. And then a latest one is that I've been looking at is SB 172, I believe it is. And that's the one that is eliminating parental consent for all healthcare decisions. And oh my gosh,
I highlighted that last week.
They're destroying our families. They've destroyed the marriages. Now they're taking the kids. We know what's going on in public education. The assault, these are things worth fighting for. And why do I say that? Because God says they're worth fighting for. He established family and he established marriage, and these things are the utmost important. And he's the creator of life. And so those abortion issues, worth every bit of the fight.
That bill you're talking about, it's insidious because, it's outright trying to reverse existing statute, existing law that expressly prohibits these decisions to be made for your child without the express written consent of a parent. Now they're framing it to where a 13-year-old can go right outside the lines and bypass the parents' rights. I mean, I hate to say it, but even on both sides of the spectrum, we've seen in this legislative session, there was a Republican Senate bill, I believe it was SB 72. I had highlighted it on one of my other shows, that in my estimation was subverting the rights of the parents in favor of grandparents. I don't know if you're familiar with that bill, but what that does is and I'm not speaking from my experience, but what if you had parents that you as a parent of a child had your parents, so your child's grandparent had views that were completely antithetical or dangerous? There's now a mechanism, if that bill were to pass, where a judge can order visitation from a grandparent that you don't want your child exposed to. And in our town, in our city, it's very broken. I mean, Las Vegas and Pahrump, where you might have systemic abuse through the generations, and you as a parent, you're trying to go ahead and shield your child from that. And it's an area where the government shouldn't be stepping in, and bureaucrats and judges shouldn't be making these decisions that the parents deserve to make. And in my estimation, both sides of the aisle are screwing some things up here. And it's up to us to be on top of them, like you said, because sometimes they're in a Carson City bubble up there. And if you show that there's opposition to these, like you said, with the numbers not being too large, but just enough to make them rethink it, it could have an enormous effect. Because we have millions of people in the state that would be probably not even realizing how thankful they are for just dozens of people stepping up and putting pressure on legislators to make them not go forward on some bad bills. So it's important.
You're exactly right, and you hit a couple of issues there. I wore my "Courage is Contagious" shirt today because it is. It absolutely is. Yeah. Some stand up. If we will stand up, more will join us. You talked about both sides of the aisle. Oh my goodness. I mean, listen, if the church doesn't show up, nobody will. And that's the message I'm giving out. I mean, this is the church's role, the church's job. It always has been,
right.
My involvement with the Women's Resource Medical Center.
Right.
I've been involved with them since 2007, president of the board since 2012, I think. I've watched interaction with the church through that ministry, and it's been hard. It's been hard in a lot of ways. It's amazing how much of the church is closed off to politics, prophecy, and pro-life. It's amazing. And, the thing with Women's Resource Medical Center is, the church honestly believes, the mindset of the church is, we thank God for the Women's Resource Medical Center and that they're doing the work that they're doing. And we are here to come alongside of them, hold up their arms, support them through their fundraising events and whatnot. And while we think that it's so noble, it is completely backwards. We do not exist to support them. They exist to support us. Pro-life, sanctity of human life, life in the womb. If the church doesn't stand up for that, then we are the most pitiful of all. And let me tell you, the church is not standing up for that. A huge segment of the church will not stand up, will not hold pro-life events or talk about that because they're not going to offend their congregation. They're going to stay perfect, it's called. They're going to stay that mixture. They want to keep the group together above all else. But in order to do that, you've got to back off on this, because this divides. Jesus said, I didn't come to bring peace. I came to bring a sword. And if you're sticking to the word, that's the problem. The church does not know the word of God, honestly.
Right.
They do, but they don't. They haven't studied the whole counsel of God. And you need the whole counsel. You need the Old Testament as well as the New Testament. And
absolutely.
And unfortunately, the huge majority of the church is not well versed in the scriptures. And that's why they don't understand the calling or the need.
Yeah, and this idea that the local church is appealing to the lost, appealing to the world, for lack of a better word, the world, right? The world, as in the schemes of the world. Jesus is very clear in Scripture that they're going to hate you because they hated me first. We should understand that when you're battling for the truth, especially the truth in God's revealed word, there's going to be opposition. If you spend all your time worried about putting out fires and irritating certain people who may be comfortable in this area of sin or this area of sin, and especially when it comes to the sin of abortion, you're losing your whole purpose, because if we're not ultimately that last bastion that's going to stand up, because it's not a question of science anymore. It's obvious to any scientist that child in there is a bona fide human being, is a baby. And now very few scientists will argue that it's not at that a very millisecond of conception. Who else is going to stand in the gap for that? Because scientists aren't standing in the gap for it. They're mum on the situation. I deal with people that profess Christianity, and it's something like you said. They don't want to touch it for the sake of dividing people. When if there's ever an issue, and the voters that say I'm not a one issue voter, so I could deal with this candidate. If there's one issue to be a one issue voter on, it's that issue. It's the pro-life issue. And it's the one that I think takes the most political courage of any. That tells me a lot about a leader, or Republican or conservative, or whatever you want to call the people that are running for any position. If they can hold a line on that issue, I think I've got 50% there with me voting for them if they're willing to put that on the line. And it's the most crucial issue I think we're facing as a church. And there's going to be judgment involved. I'm not sure exactly what that's going to look like for the local church or for professing Christians, but God's going to have judgment for how we treat this issue. Absolutely.
Yeah, judgment begins in the house of God, and it very well should. God's given us the responsibility. He's given us the calling. He's given us the anointing if we'll walk in it.
Right.
He's given us the victory. We don't fight to victory. We fight from it. I mean, we have the victory.
Right.
And the scriptures declare that, but the church is just not walking in that at all. You're right. The pro-life issue was the major issue that was brought up from the liberal left in this last election cycle. And I have to tell you, the conservative right failed miserably in the rebuttal to that. We should have made our in fact, I believe most of the conservative candidates that I followed and dealt with just really swept it under the carpet, just wouldn't respond, just didn't feel like it was going to be a big enough issue that would hurt them. And wow, that was the issue, I believe. If you just want to look at any single issues that were involved, there's a lot of things that factored into how that last election went. But as far as issues go, that was the premier issue. And
it's like
the right didn't handle it well.
Yeah, and it's the things that I think that our leadership in the conservative movement or the conservative side of the political spectrum, the stuff that we can control, because we can't eliminate the Dominion voting machines in every jurisdiction, the weirdness happening with crazy counts in different states, including ours, Pennsylvania, wherever else. But some of the things that we can do, we're not doing a very good enough job in controlling and promoting, better candidates to represent us. So I think what you said is very accurate. It was the perfect storm of these different things that came along. When Roe v. Wade was overturned, our reaction to things, it all kind of conspired for what we saw this last November. I mean, I'm thankful that we that we have a governor now, because some of these bills that we're talking about are going to probably pass and be voted on. But it's my hope and my prayer that he'll err on the side of reason and veto a ton of bills this cycle, because you better get that pen ready. There's going to be some that go through the cracks, and I hope he will have the courage to do it, to veto.
Yeah,
we're
going to find out. We're going to find out, and we're praying for Joe. Come on, Joe. You know what you need to do. But we'll see what he does.
Yeah, definitely. And before we start to wrap it up, I know we're getting ahead of the time here, but as a person who reveres the Constitution outside of the Bible, I think it's probably the most important document that we have. I also share another conviction with you, and let me elaborate on that. So nationally, it's obvious we suffer from poor representation and leadership in the U.S. Congress and the Senate, spending and debt out of control. An Article 5 Convention of States is the only remedy that I can see, an earthly remedy, in my opinion. What's your position on that?
Article 5 Convention of States. Well, first off, I see when you're talking about remedies, I believe the trajectory of our nation, basically, and I have thought about this. I have prayed about this. I have ran this through every filter I can. And I only come up with three options: cessation of states, okay, which really is not viable. Texas may be able to pull that off, but they're not going to pull it off well. And it's not, I don't even think Texas can pull it off, let alone anybody else. But honestly, that's something that could happen. The next is Convention of States, which I'll explain a little bit more here in a minute. And the third is Civil War. I'm grateful for our Second Amendment. I, support our 2A. I hold courses and classes, in our church. The Bible talks a lot about self-defense and the carrying of arms. And I believe the scriptures declare absolutely exactly, what God authorizes us to do. But with that said, we are the most armed nation. They say, the civilian population of our nation is more armed than our military. Obviously, we don't have, F-16s and tanks, although who knows, because there's some crazies out there that have quite the artillery. When it goes off, we don't wish this upon our worst enemy. We don't want bloodshed. As Christians, we don't want that. So I agree with you. The only peaceful means that I see is Article 5. And our founding fathers knew very well and I believe that's under divine inspiration, whether they were, followers of Jesus Christ, solid followers, or agnostics or atheists. God gave them foresight. And they knew that there would come a time when our federal government would usurp every bit of authority from what this republic was originally established to be. So they knew that our Constitution would need to be amended. And right now, there's only two ways that amendments can happen to our Constitution. One is through the approval of Congress. Now, we know Congress is not ever going to amend the Constitution in a way that is ever going to threaten their power or their agenda. And we just know that it's just not going to happen. The second way is through Article 5, which says that through a 2/3 agreement of states in the Republic, that a convention can be called for the purpose of proposing amendments to the Constitution. In our Republic, 2/3 would mean the 34 states. And what that means is that if 34 states will agree to a predetermined agenda of topics of proposed amendments that would be added to our Constitution, that under the Constitution, a convention must be called. It's called Convention of States. It's not the same as the Constitutional Convention that the critics like. It's a constitutional convention. It's not. It's a very specific, as detailed in Article 5, to make amendments. Article 5 is worded to this Constitution, so it's not like a convention go in and destroy our Constitution and reestablish a brand new one. There has been 3 predetermined agenda items in this movement that's been happening now the last number of years. The first one is term limits, which I think we all agree on both sides of the fence. We can agree that we need to have term limits. The second one is restraining fiscal responsibility. In other words, cutting back on this out of control spending, balanced budget. I know we've got a deficit to deal with. That's a whole nother animal. But from this point forth, getting this spending under control, getting a balanced budget, I mean, that would be another proposed amendment. And then the third one would be limiting the scope and jurisdiction of the federal government. That really targets the fourth branch of government, all of the department ofs. And this isn't to eliminate them. It is to bring them back, much like happened in the Dobbs case with Roe v. Wade and then the Dobbs case, bringing it back onto the states. This needs to be handled state by state, and then let the people make their decisions that way based on their state. So here's the thing, is the threshold is so high for any amendments to even make it, because what's got to happen is, 2/3 of the states have to agree to call this under the prearranged agenda. Then anything that comes out of that then has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states. And you know very well, and your listeners are very well in tune of the steps that have to, be gone through for, any state, House or Senate chamber it's got to go through committees. It's got to pass them. It's got to go to the floor. It's got to, there's so many steps that has to go through. And then 3/4 of the states have to agree to the ratification of any of these proposed amendments. So that's what a convention of states is. I'm the Nevada Coalition's director for Convention of States. I wholeheartedly believe in it. The Republican Party is opposed to an Article 5 convention. They have been absolutely duped. I am sorry. And so, we get into these, endless, back and forth, and I don't even want to give the other side, credit for the things that they purport that will happen if this is called conventionofstates.com. It's a very simple website. You can go to conventionofstates.com. You can read all about it. Every rebuttal to all of the attacks that come from both sides against it are answered very, very well on that website. I'm always available if anybody ever wants to talk a little bit more in depth in person about Convention of States. And, Nevada, so far 19 states have signed on. 3 more states are teetering. They've already passed the chambers. So probably in the next few months, we fully expect that number to go up to 22 states on board now. We need 34 to get the 2/3 mark. Nevada's not even on the bottom rung of the ladder, but we're swinging as hard as we can swing. It's all about educating people now. So, we'll always try to get the word out if we're going to hold any town halls. I'm going to be out of town for the next few weeks, but when I get back, I hope to hold a Convention of States town hall at the church, and I'll get that word out in any way that I possibly can. I'll shoot you a news blast. You can announce it, when it's coming time. Just to get the word out and keep educating everybody and keep trying to move forward. Whether Nevada will be one of the 34 or not, that's to be seen. But we're going to sure try.
Well, I'll tell you one thing is that when I ran for office, I was one of the few Republicans that would refuse to sign our state party's resolutions on their platform because of that. Because it's like you said, it's very explicitly in the Republican platform. We oppose an Article 5 Convention of States, which, what I find is if you're getting vitriol, especially vitriol based on misinformation and propaganda, you're getting it from two sides. To me, that's kind of encouraging because A, you're above the target, and B, there's a legitimate threat to that possibly becoming a reality. Now, it may not happen in our lifetimes. I don't know. I hope it really does. But for the sake of the Republic, because like you said, the House of Representatives is never going to vote themselves term limits. They're not going to do anything with their salaries or their retirement or all their, they get in there. They're supposed to be working for us, representing us. They are retiring or millionaires, halfway through their terms. They're the 1% of the 1% of our population. And I think our founders never envisioned it that way. They envisioned citizen-led representatives in Congress, and we sadly don't get that. So I think you're above the target. So if you do announce anything in the future, let us know. We'll put it on the radio station out here. I'll constantly announce it on the on the podcast, and we'll hopefully fill up your entire auditorium. And I was going to mention that I was going to say for a church that you really only launched 5 or 6 years ago, almost, right?
Yeah, about 5 and a half.
It's grown. I mean, it exponentially, and that is a testimony to you doing the right thing up there, and it doesn't go unnoticed. And anytime I'm in Las Vegas over the weekend, I'm always telling my wife we should maybe stick around an extra day, come back on Sunday maybe, and visit you guys. So I'm looking forward to that in the near future, hopefully. Before you move, because it's a great little spot there. It felt like home the first time I walked in there.
Yeah. Well, we love you guys, and you always have a seat there. You know that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is going to probably wrap it up for the time that we have allotted here. Hopefully, in the future, you would consider coming back and being a guest again on the show. It was great talking to you. I appreciate your time, Pastor. On behalf of Pastor Gregg Seymour and the Nevada Patriot Podcast, God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you all. Thanks, Matt.
You got it.
You've just spent some of the best minutes of your life hanging out with Matt Sadler at the Nevada Patriot Podcast. Thank you for listening. Tell a friend and join us next time. After you catch your breath, check out the NevadaPatriot.com for more content, advertising opportunities, and to give listener feedback. That website again is the NevadaPatriot.com. Until next time, Patriots, stay American.